No, Gnu's is good Gnu's with Gary Gnu. Remember the Great Space Coaster? I'm talking way over the head of anyone under the age of 40 right now. But if you're 40 or above, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So there was a New York Times story that came out this weekend, ladies and gentlemen, that should scare everybody again, because whenever the New York Times gets out ahead of a story, it should tell you one thing. They are desperate to set and transform the narrative before the actual story gets out. Remember, the New York Times was the first to break the Azra Turk story. Azra Turk was the FBI spy asset sent to spy on George Papadopoulos, and they did that for one reason, to get out of the head of the story and make sure that the story wasn't FBI, politically motivated spies on the Trump campaign. The story was what when the Times broke it? Confidential informant used against Trump associate. You know what I'm saying? They want to contour the story to take the edge off. That way, when the story comes out, political spying on the Trump campaign happened at the FBI. The New York Times can say, no, that's not what happened. We covered this months ago. Look at this. So the story comes out this week, and check this story out. I want to go to the first thing because here's what's happening. They're desperate to get out ahead of two things: the Durham report and something else that happened this weekend, which I'll get to in a moment. It's buried down in the piece. Headline, New York Times, the national security wiretap system was long plagued by risk of errors and omissions. So now the New York Times is acknowledging that they wiretap people? I thought that was all a big conspiracy theory. But notice how the headline, again, is massaging the narrative. You got a massage therapist out there with the elbows or Reiki or whatever they do. They're desperate to do this now. Reflexology pushes on the... This is what they're doing. They're trying to get... No, Joe. This program was plagued with problems for a long time. Can we employ the Dan Bongino translator here? The Dan Bongino translator, here's what they really mean. Folks, this wasn't a political targeting of Donald Trump. This has been going on for a long time, and it's a cultural thing at the FBI. Why? Why are they trying to avoid this? Because the narrative that is the most devastating to the Democrats, which is true, I have video, is that the FBI was politically biased at the upper levels and targeted Donald Trump. They can't have that out there. Let's go to takeaway number one from the New York Times piece. Let me show you how they massage it. That's the narrative they don't want. It wasn't politics. It's a cultural thing. New York Times, quote, the problems may be part of a broader pattern. Oh, here we go, Joe. It's a cultural thing at the FBI. Maybe part of a broader pattern in other applications that never receive the same intense scrutiny. According to interviews, of course, anonymous interviews with DOJ officials and FBI officials. The system is vulnerable, they said, these anonymous sources, to lower-level agents. Here we go, throwing the lower-level agents under the bus, suppressing or overlooking evidence that weakens their case when they seek permission to conduct surveillance. You get it? You get it? Dan Bongino translator, this was not political targeting by the FBI or the Trump team, Joe. Under any circumstances, it's a cultural problem. It's happened before, and it's these low-level guys and gals that are doing it. It's not an institutional thing at the high levels. Those guys, Comey, McCabe, they're above reproach. It's the low-level guys. They're really horrible. Look what they did. It's a cultural thing there. Oh, it gets better. Remember what they're trying to get away from, and you'll be able to translate where they're going. They're trying to get away from the truth, which is the FBI and the Obama administration spied on their political opponents. They can't have that. Takeaway number two from the New York Times piece as they do the dance here, which is just fantabulous watching them do this, especially when you can employ translators like we can. The FBI's misuse of its powers under the FISA Act has been politicized to a degree it never was in the Robert Hansen case. He was the infamous FBI spy on the inside, where an inspector general's discovery of the failures attracted little notice. Did you catch it? So now in the first paragraph of this, come back to me for a minute. I want to go back to this one. First paragraph. Did you catch what they did there?
Yes, I did.
They're trying to get away from the Trump political targeting, and now they're blaming anyone looking into the abuse of the FISA courts to spy on Trump for politicizing it. This is amazing. This is amazing. And by the way, who wrote this piece? Adam Goldman, famed Russian collusion hoaxer, a guy with zero credibility with anyone. They leaked to him, the Bureau, when they want to get out ahead of a story. So the story now, according to Goldman, is not only going to be there's no political spying, it was a cultural thing, but you looking into the FISA process is politicizing the story, and you're the problem. Did you catch that? It is not true, as Adam Goldman, noted collusion hoaxer, zero credibility fake news specialist, zero. It is not true that they did not find political bias in the targeting of Carter Page, who worked on the Trump campaign and was spied on. That is not true. Now, in order to not repeat the same mistakes in talking in broad overviews on Friday, like the Bernie Sanders thing, again, to use the line I've used only 100 times today, let's put actual meat on the bone here. Let's go to Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General who looked into the political spying on the Trump campaign, and listen to his own words. A couple of things here. I got 3 cuts. We'll go through them one at a time. Don't worry about it. He doesn't eliminate political bias as a motive. Wait, that's what the New York Times said. They said no evidence was found. That's not what he said. Matter of fact, at some points, he seems to point to political bias as the only possible explanation. And then at the end, let's point to Horowitz himself that the FBI knew this thing was BS the whole time. Let's go to cut number 1, where he clearly lays out, granted, Horowitz always talks in circuitous terms because he never wants to give the media a soundbite. This is him clearly indicating he did find political bias. Contrary to fake Russian collusion hoaxer Adam Goldman, what he says in his piece. Check this out.
But you definitely, in both these investigations, you found political bias.
We found, through the text messages, evidence of people's political bias, correct.
Also, political motivation. For example, Bruce Ord talked about how Christopher Steele was desperate to make sure that President Trump didn't become president.
Well, as to Mr. Steele, that was, of course, a very important part of this discussion, is when they understood his motivations and his potential bias. And we have the November statement from Mr. Orr that he had been told by Mr. Steele that he was desperate to prevent.
So again,
folks, keep in mind, if you're watching and listening to or reading New York Times content, do you understand you're being lied to with just impunity? That is not what Horowitz said. Understand, Goldman's narrative in this story is there's no evidence of political bias. The FBI didn't politically spy on Trump. Follow me here. It's a cultural problem and some low-level agents did it. That's his story. None of that is true. None of that is true. You just heard Horowitz himself. He found rampant political bias in the texts, in the decision by Bruce Orr to talk to Steele, even though Steele indicated himself he was politically biased. What part of this are the journalists missing? He goes on. This is Patrick Leahy, Democrat senator, and that was Ron Johnson, Republican senator from Wisconsin, asking this question. Here's Pat Leahy trying to take the sting out of what Horowitz said at the briefing. This briefing happened a while ago. But it's not hard to find. I found it in 2 seconds on Twitter. This is Patrick Leahy trying to take the sting out of it, and he still can't do it because Horowitz still has to admit that he can't eliminate rampant political bias as the only motive for doing this. Check this out.
Is it correct that you found no evidence that the investigation was motivated by anti-Trump or political bias? Is that correct?
We found no evidence that the initiation of the investigation was motivated by political bias. It gets murkier. The question gets more challenging, Senator, when you get to the FISA and when you get to the attorney's actions, for example, in connection with that FISA.
Right.
Did they have a duty to report to their supervisors and eventually to the court exculpatory information?
Absolutely.
They did not.
They did not.
Why?
That's the question I can't specifically answer for you.
Can you say it wasn't because of political bias?
On decisions regarding those FISA matters, I do not know their state of mind at this point.
So,
folks, That's his own words, the inspector general. Joe did not mess with that. It's a complete cut. Now, it's obviously edited for time, but that soundbite, we're not messing with that. That was Lindsey Graham and Patrick Leahy directly asking him, can you eliminate political bias basically as a reason for the FBI spying on the Trump team with the FISA warrant? He can't. Now, combine that with what he said before. He found rampant evidence of political bias throughout the investigation. It's his own words. The New York Times is lying to you.
You just heard The Dan Bongino Show. You can also get Dan's podcasts on iTunes or SoundCloud. And follow Dan on Twitter 24/7 @DBongino.